Welcome to Language in Film, where we take a closer look at how language is used creatively in cinema. Since The Ballad of Buster Scruggs consists of 6 separate stories, how these stories are arranged and in what order the audience will receive them is a critical factor in the overall experience of the film. So let's look at the arrangement of these 6 stories and why the Coens chose to present them in this specific order. I've made separate videos on some specific chapters, but this video will assume that you've seen the movie, so spoilers ahead, and are somewhat familiar with each storyline. The chapters all seem unrelated to one another at first glance, except that they share the same historical time period and place, the frontier of the old American West. On closer inspection, however, the chapters do pair off nicely with one another. The first and last chapters are not stories so much as conversations, which serve to bookend the middle 4 stories that each have a more traditional narrative structure. The remaining 4 stories in turn form pairs that share some characteristics. So let's go through the pairs, examine how each of their stories relate to one another, and how the pairs themselves relate to each other. Both these stories concern a solitary man, one young, one old, seeking his fortune. Of the 2 men, the old prospector, played by Tom Waits, is far more likable. He makes his living through grit and toil, methodically tracking down the vein of gold he jubilantly calls Mr. Pocket.
Good night, Mr. Pocket.
He is not hard on the earth, however, but has a reverence and respect for nature, taking only what he needs. He's like the hunter who honors the spirit of the creature he must eat to survive. He's part of the natural order that surrounds him and recognizes his place in that cycle. Contrast this with the outlaw in Near Algodones, who tries to get rich quick off the money of others, who seems to have little regard for even his own life, much less anyone else's, except in the most superficial way. You could easily swap him out for the antagonist in All Gold Canyon, as they are essentially the same character. Thus, in a sense, the prospector and the outlaw are even pitted against one another in this scene, where fate chooses the nice guy as the victor. Taken together, Near Algodones and All Gold Canyon present us with polar opposites of the same Western archetype, the rugged individualist working to make his fortune under the open sky of the wild frontier. One is wise, reverent, and connected to the things around him, while the other is ruthless, brash, and aloof. The outward environments of both stories reflect the inner state of each man's soul. The prospector is surrounded by fertile, majestic scenery, while the outlaw lives in a dust-covered wasteland where the only plant is the gnarled hanging tree. One man is just at the beginning of his fortune, while the other is at the end of it. And each man, we might say, gets what's coming to him.
There's your share, you measly skunk.
This is not true of the next pair of stories, however. The characters in Meal Ticket and The Gal Who Got Rattled do not get the fate they deserve. The main characters suffer outcomes which are clearly unjust. In Meal Ticket, the orator is an eloquent artist, but a quadruple amputee who is thus at the mercy of his Irish business partner. Once he's no longer useful, the Irishman callously murders him to replace him with a counting chicken. The Irishman, who should be punished for this, instead moves on to a new and assumingly more lucrative business endeavor. In The Gal Who Got Rattled, we witness 2 empathetic characters forge a bond and future together, which is then abruptly ripped away from them as the result of one heartbreaking snap decision. The other difference between this pair of stories and the last is that Near Algodones and All Gold Canyon are about one main character, whereas this set feature a central pair and the relationship between them. Meal Ticket is about the relationship between 2 very different men, and Gal Who Rattled is a love story between a man and a woman. Both sets of relationships, or couples, have things in common. In Meal Ticket, the couple is obviously thrown together out of necessity in order to make a living. It's a functional relationship, not a friendship. The marriage proposal in Gal Who Rattled is also presented as a pragmatic decision. Billy Knapp asks for her hand as a way to absolve her of her brother's debts. Marriage itself is a pragmatic institution in this time, And this is shown to us in the opening scene where we learn that Alice's brother plans to have her married to a potential business partner like she's nothing more than a bargaining chip. However, there is a fundamental difference between the couples. While the marriage proposal is presented in pragmatic terms, Billy and Alice like each other and do fall in love. They have a lot in common. They're both kind, gentle, and religious, but not in an annoying, judgmental way. And they share a very touching moment where they both agree on the worldview that nothing on earth is certain. It makes the conclusion of their story that much more devastating. Alice and Billy are at the beginning of their relationship, while the Irishman and orator are at the end of theirs. They've spent every moment together. They travel, work, eat, and sleep together. The orator cannot even go to the bathroom without relying on the other. The Irishman takes the orator with him when he goes to a brothel, like one would do with a valuable object that they don't want to risk being stolen. The Irishman treats the orator like his property, the same way Alice is treated by her brother, and in stark contrast to how Billy Knapp engages with her. And despite the fact these two men, orator and Irishman, are always together, they literally never speak to each other. There's hardly any dialogue in Meal Ticket, as most of the language we hear takes the form of the orator's soliloquies. By contrast, Gal Who Rattled is full of dialogue and exchanges between characters, and it's through this superbly crafted dialogue that Billy and Alice fall in love. So once again, we have polar opposites, this time looking at the way two people in this historical era form relationships. And like the stories we looked at with the individuals, here we see both the beginning and end points of the continuum. Then we've got the first and last chapters that bookend the entire set. Chapter 1 is a conversation between Buster Scruggs and the audience, where he breaks the fourth wall and speaks directly to the camera. Chapter 6 is a conversation between humanity and death itself. I've already outlined how these two chapters are related in my video on The Mortal Remains, and I don't want to bore you by repeating myself. So please watch that video for more analysis on the commonalities between these two chapters. But once again, we have a dichotomy present, where one chapter focuses on an individual, Buster Scruggs, while chapter 6 focuses on society, with multiple characters having multiple viewpoints and representing different rungs on the social hierarchy. Notice how key the arrangement of the chapters is. If you switch the places of the two middle stories, then you could divide the 6 chapters in half and have the 3 stories about individuals first, followed by the 3 stories about relationships. You would also have the 3 more lighthearted chapters divided from the 3 more tragic ones. But that would have been a mistake and resulted in the first half and the second half feeling like 2 separate movies, with a jarring shift between them. So notice how by simply keeping these 2 chapters where they are allows for a nice variety that keeps pitching us forward. We're never fully situated in one specific genre or paradigm. It keeps us on our toes as we experience alternating waves of comedy and tragedy. The swift and ironic Near Algodones is followed by the bleakest tale, Meal Ticket, in turn followed by the most uplifting of the stories, All Gold Canyon, which is followed by Gal Who Rattled, which manages to be funny at the beginning, sweet and hopeful in the middle, and crushingly tragic at the climax. Combine this with the fact that the comic elements are full of black humor and the most violent moments still somehow make us laugh. And the result is a baroque and bittersweet tapestry of the harshness and reality of life on the frontier of the Old West, where black is white, white is black, and the good guys sometimes win and sometimes lose.